The Flash, issue 3, Legacy 803. This is Cy Spurrier writing with Mike Diodato Jr. on the art. So, we'll see if we can make sense of what's going on in The Flash, because issue 2 definitely left me feeling a little bit lost. This issue is a bit more focused, which I appreciated.
Yep.
I was kind of, I won't say dreading reading this, but I liked the first issue despite it being very wordy. Second issue I liked less and thought that the wordiness and structure got in the way of me really enjoying it. This issue, I think, is back closer towards the first issue, where I think it flowed a bit better. It's a bit more focused. There's some genuine comedy at the start where Flash tries to do an impression of Grodd, and Terrific points out that it just sounds like his Batman impression. So then he just starts doing a Batman impression.
God, just the way that the font goes with that too.
Yeah,
like it's like dripping the darkness, and I knew exactly what he's doing, the Christian Bale voice.
Yeah.
So very, very good on that one.
So yeah, it's looking good. But he's talking about Terrific about this anomaly, this light thing that's appeared right above the Flash statue in the park, and they're looking into it. They talk about what it could be. Wally's like, just spooky Speed Force stuff, I guess, and Terrific's like, no, that's not science enough. We have to science the shit out of this. And then Max Mercury shows up to offer his input, and he decides to use his powers along with Wally to go with Wally, because Wally's been kind of like teleporting somewhere. Like that's been one of the things that's been happening every so often. And he goes with Wally to this place, but they realize quite quickly that this isn't another dimension. This isn't like an alternate Earth. This is still their Earth, but looking at it through what they call a different lens. So there's all this like purple stuff all over the place. And it ends up raising this question, because they leave this place because they see something running at them very quick. And they both get this feeling that something really violent's coming. So they pull out of here as quickly as they can. And then Bart's there, and they deduce quite quickly that whatever this place is, this other plane of existence that they've went to, that violent thing that was running towards them was Bart. It's the idea that whenever they use the Speed Force, it's doing something bad to part of existence that maybe they've never really considered before, and it's causing damage. At least that's what it appears to be right now. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting concept. Like, this idea that there's a price for them using their powers and whatever. Obviously, they're going to keep using their powers because they're comic book characters, but I'm curious to see where this is going. At least I was intrigued by that.
Yeah, so the idea that wherever they're going, I also like that essentially from the last issue. So I read issue 2 and then issue 3 back to back. And I do think that it helped issue 2 having that right in my memory when reading this, because what Max says is like it's Earth from a different angle, right? And so that's why everything seems a bit off, and that having Max being the guy instead of like Barry or any of the other speedsters with him is Max looks at the Speed Force like a spiritual thing, right? Whereas Terrific's looking at all of this through a science lens, and it's through Max that Wally's able to, realize, oh, that's Bart, and there's each action has a reaction. And so they've been using the Speed Force and cutting through whatever this dimension is, this other angle of Earth, for so long. Like, what have they been doing? And I like that Max's kind of thing is like, well, we never really stopped to think about it. But if they're going to stop and think about it, is that going to change anything, right? Is being aware of what they're doing going to change anything that's going on in there? I like that whole point of contention here.
Yeah, and going along with the issue being quite funny is that here when Bart shows up, he sees this light thing, this anomaly, and says, oh man, I'm going to poke it with a stick. And that's funny on its own, but it ends up being paid off really well at the end of the issue, because after this, Max and Wally go sort of back in, kind of, and they end up with one of the gorillas that was working for Grodd. But Grodd is, this gorilla though is like parts of him are kind of like cut away, and his speech bubbles are all like this as well, where there's just these chunks, these triangles that have been taken out of them, and we hear this voice say, "Oh, what a pathetic little monkey." Don't worry, he's going now, and he basically kind of folds, and they realize, and I actually really like the effect on the lettering here for this voice, where all of the bubbles are kind of at this angle, and there's like a heavy drop shadow on it, so they all look like they've got this kind of almost
there's a pull to them.
Yeah, almost like there's like a slight 3D effect to the bubble itself, where it's kind of at an angle for every single time it shows up. I like that, but. Yeah, basically it's taunting Wally and Max, and they kind of deduce it's the Folding Man at a certain point. But they're really struggling here, and they end up somewhere else, and those red alien looking dudes that we've seen before are like watching from the top of this rock, and they're like, "Oh shit, we're here at Speed Point. Like the powers are fading. Like I don't have enough Speed Force energy to get us home." And Max gives Wally all of his Speed Force power to get home, but it doesn't actually seemingly work. He ends up in another weird alternate place where there's a statue of every single speedster, like every Flash family member, and even some Titans. And now he's like at the end of like existence for the Flashies. He's at the end of the story or something. He doesn't know how to get back, and he's getting really, freaked out by it. And then the end of the issue that pulls him back to reality, because it feels like he's trapped here. To the point where he's sitting down and saying, "Please." This stick touches his face, and the panels kind of bend, and then that rips him back out into the real world. And it turns out that Bart poking the thing with a stick was like this tether back to the real world that Wally was able to kind of like, not even intentionally, just kind of,
right?
It just kind of poked him back into reality, and it's like Max is now trapped in this space between spaces, and Wally's here now, kind of freaking out about that. So they have to get Max back for a start, but yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, and so he also thinks back to what the stillness, those aliens that talked to him at the beginning of issue 2.
Yeah, these were the ones that were color coded. There was like a different color each one.
Yeah, that they called it like some kind of membrane, or I forget the actual term that he uses. But Wally remembers what it's called, and that's what gives him the idea. Like, this is something to them, and that's where they're all operating out of. And then there's another theme throughout that Spurrier's using about time. Like when they're in the folded place. They talk about knocking the time out of them and all this other. There's a lot of concepts at play here.
It's super sci-fi in a way that Flash. Oh, Flash is always a little bit sci-fi for sure, but this feels like it's gone into something else here. The idea that like there's like a membrane to reality, that every time the speedsters are using their powers to go through it, they're like destroying the brain cells,
they're
basically.
showing parts of it, and two, that it's kind of like what Zoom would do, right? Because Zoom from Hunter Zolomon, he didn't use the Speed Force; he moved through time, and that's almost like what Wally's doing in this other realm. It's almost like he's blinking in and out of ours, but when he still moves, he's moving through time. Yeah, just a lot of things to think about. This, I definitely prefer this issue. Issue 2 was kind of a down, just because there was so much he was throwing at you. Here, where the ideas are starting to come into play, like when he ends up in that garden, and it's almost like it's speedster heaven, because Wally almost gets tricked into being at peace, and that's where he's kind of sitting there. He wants to get out, but he's like, but I'm so tranquil right now. It's like a stillness. Like he doesn't have to do anything. And it's like, and is that what the end of the Speed Force is? It just is. It's peace. It's happy. It's, you know what I mean? It's in action, but not like it's a mindful inaction almost.
Or is this just a trick from the stillness to try and make him stop running? The idea that if he's content here, he'll stop running and he'll stop ruining their reality or whatever. It's like, there's some interesting stuff here, and I feel like once we have like more of it more of the information and we see more of the aspects of it and we have more of a solid idea of what's going on. Right now it is very much bathed in mystery and there's a lot that we don't understand yet, and it is a lot to try and remember between these issues, and I think issue 2 really suffered for that for me. But
yeah,
I thought this one was better at being focused and telling more of a clear story that had a good setup and payoff with the whole Bart and the stick thing. Like, it's really funny, but it's also like a good little payoff to that where that pulls him back to reality. So yeah, interesting.
I'm gonna poke it with a stick. God, Impulse is great. We don't have enough Impulse in our comics right now, so the fact that he got to be the hero here by poking things with a stick, that's good.
Yeah, so and I think that's even a call. Isn't there a line at the start where Terrific says to Wally, "Don't poke it or don't touch it with that"? Yeah. So it's like a double.
You also just reminded me that the Terrific scientists are arguing about what to do, and when Max shows up, he's like, "Hey, your logic and reason people are about to throw fists over there." I thought that was another fun little line. So, but yeah, no, this made it fun to read in ways that the last ones weren't. So I think I'm gonna stick through Flash just to see where this goes. Because this was the make or break issue. Because after 2, I was kind of like, I don't know. And I read this last. This was one of the last books that I read, and it really hit. And I don't know if that's just because the inclusion of the other speedsters, right, of Max and Impulse and that stuff, and I'm just on mark for that.
Yeah, I will say, so I'm enjoying the art a lot. I really like the Adult Dreamers art. I like how sort of moody and different it feels. Like, it's very different from what I usually expect on Flash, and I like that it is different from the last few runs. I also, they've had this consistent style with the layouts where there's these extra panels at this around the edges. It's almost like if you imagine a margin around a comic book page where all the panels end. All of these pages have random extra panels sticking out, but not all the time, so there's still some negative space, but it gives it this... I think the more we're reading the story, the more I'm seeing thematically why this has been a choice that they've made to be a consistent thing, is that it's almost like these are the parts of the world that are outside the edge of the normal part of the page, even though I know most comic books now don't have margins in most of their pages. Most just use the full page. But old school comics had the white margin, right? And this book feels like it has the white margin, but some panels are having these extra bits that are going into it. And it feels like...
it's the space between.
Yeah, it's representing the extra layers of reality almost, and that there's spaces outside the normal part of the story. So I think that's really cool. So there's a lot of smart stuff going on here, but it does feel like there's also a lot of things being juggled. And I remember reading issue 2 and thinking, "Oh God, I'm trying to remember all the things that issue 1 introduced." And it was tough. So I'm definitely down to read the next issue though. I think I'm enjoying the big heady sci-fi stuff that it's doing. But it is definitely a bit wordy at times. Although I don't think it's been as bad as it was in the first issue though.
No, and it helps with added to break up that wordiness is the humor, whether it's from Max or the scientist or Impulse or Wally himself, and because that when you have the humor, then it makes the seeing the gorilla get folded in half, that makes it that's startling. That's why comedy works well with horror. These little pieces of space to reset, and I figured that Spurrier has figured that out a little bit after, info dumping in the first 2. But it feels like a Flash book like I haven't read before, because it's doing stuff with the Speed Force, but not as we know it, right? Like, I don't know how much of the New 52 Flash you read.
Some, but not a ton. I didn't like it that much.
Yeah. That just did stuff with the Speed Force as this other dimension and people getting stuck in there and all this other stuff. So it's cool to see it from this different, almost a different level of understanding.
Yeah. All right. What are you giving the Flash issue 3?
I'm gonna 7.5.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think that sounds about right. It's on the brink of great. It's just a little bit too muddy to quite get that great score.